All right, Flexbox. So Flexbox is Flexbox was invented before CSS Grid, and we talked about CSS Grid first. I felt it was appropriate to talk about CSS Grid because I think overall it has a bit more applications in terms of really designing a website and keeping things nice and structured and tight. Very good for layouts. Very good for big picture things as far as your website is concerned, which is kind of the main reason why it was created in the first place. So what is Flexbox? Well, Flexbox and Grid are very similar. They're both things we use for laying out items in our website. However, I found this picture on the internet which kind of accurately describes the main difference between these two options. So Grid keeps everything nice and tight, nice and organized. We can clearly see 3 columns here. Flexbox, who knows how many columns this would be in a grid. There's no rhyme or reason. All I know is I've got 3 items on top, 3 divs, and I've got 4 items in the second row. So more accurately, Flexbox, it should look like this. Flexbox works basically on a single row basis, which means you're just adding stuff across your website. However, Flexbox gives us the flexibility to maybe, hey, if I got a lot of things going on, I'm gonna wrap them around. I'm gonna wrap them down here, just so I don't have the entire web page spanning of a bunch of divs or items. But Flexbox is gonna allow me to just kind of situate them so that they are semi-organized, but really just organized within the same space of your website, not organized in nice concrete, discrete rows and columns, or columns, I should say. Flexbox is just, hey, I've got a bunch of stuff and I want to keep things organized, so I'm going to use a Flexbox. And there's another really good use or a problem that Flexbox solves that we haven't really talked about. We've been ignoring, and I'll show you here in the video. So it works very similar to CSS Grid, where if I want to create a Flexbox, all I have to do is create a div, and I will make it a Flexbox. So typically we call these, I don't know, containers. So I'm going to make a div, and it's going to act as a container. Notice I'm using classes again. And let's add some things into our container. So I'm going to say div. I'll call them boxes for now. You could call them whatever you wanted, but whatever. Box. I'm going to add 4 boxes into this container. Fire up my website, and I can't see anything, obviously. So let's do some styles here. All right. So my boxes are all under the same class, and that is a really good reason to use classes, is because I can stylize all 4 of those boxes at once, because anything with the class of box is going to get stylized. So let's just set the height to, I don't know, 100 pixels. Let's set the width to 100 pixels. And background color, green. So now if I look at my website, I've got 4 boxes. And remember, divs take up the entire web page, the entire width. So they're all stacked on top of each other. It's a bit hard to see these divs. So what I could do is, along with giving them a class, I could give them an ID. And I could say this is going to be box 1. There will be box 2, box 3, and box 4. And the reason I want to give them unique IDs is so that I can, instead of them being all the same background color, I can give them nice individual colors. So my first box will be green. My second box, nice red. Box 3, box 4, just copying and pasting and picking nice different colors. All right, so now it's a bit easier to see those 4 different boxes. Now what we're going to do is something we've already tackled this problem, so this is a new way to solve this problem. What if I wanted these divs all on the same line? Well, you would probably, have to change the display property to inline block, and you might have to float some things depending on how you've got your website structured. But watch this. This is a Flexbox video, so I'm going to turn my container into a Flexbox. So, dot container display, not grid this time, that would make a CSS grid, a grid box, but flex. And with this one property of changing my container into a Flexbox, I have 4 divs all sharing the same line, which is nice because usually websites, we run into this issue a lot. So here is a new way to fix that problem with literally one line of code. So already we're making we're getting more effective, more efficient. Now, just for visualization purposes, I'm going to give my container a border. Let's make it 3 pixels solid black, just so I can see this Flexbox. Okay, so here is the Flexbox. And no surprise, it spans the entire width of my website. All right, so what can you do with Flexbox? Well, there's I'll say 2 primary properties that make Flexbox very useful. The first one is justify content. And justify content allows you to basically specify how your items in your Flexbox are going to be aligned horizontally. And if you want to get technical, horizontal alignment, you can think of this as like an XY axis. A lot of people say that. Where the x-axis, or in other words, the horizontal alignment that goes from left to right, is usually denoted the main axis or the main alignment. So anytime you're working left and right horizontally, you're working with the main axis of this Flexbox. Do you need to know that? Not really, I don't think so. But when you're reading up on stuff and Googling stuff, horizontally it's referred to main. So this will allow me to change the alignment, the horizontal alignment. So there's really 5 or 6 main ones that we like to use. Flex Start is the default one. And as you can see, it doesn't change my website because it is already set to that. Flex Start means start all of the items in the Flexbox at the front of the Flexbox, the left. We read left to right. You could go Flex End, and that's going to push them to the right, the end of your website. Flex Center, just Center. Very useful one. That's going to put everything in the center of your div, or your Flexbox, sorry. And then we've got some fun, or some ones that kind of dabble with the center. For example, you could go space evenly, which is going to take each item, each div, and give it equal space to the left and to the right between other content, other divs inside of your Flexbox. That's a very handy one. And less useful, space between. pushes basically everything as far away as it can be from each other. The main difference being the left and the right items, they get no space between the parents, the container. So it basically gives you maximum space between everything except the container that those items are in. And there was one last one that's space around. So it doesn't give you an equal distribution. However, you do get a bit of space between elements 1 and element 4 from their container, or from the edges of their container. Space evenly is probably pretty useful one. And space between. All right, I'm going to give these these divs, I'm going to give them some more width. Let's say they were really wide. Let's give them 300 pixels width. So they're pretty wide now. All right, an issue that Flexbox solves really well, and something that we've taken for granted up until this point, is you don't know how big the browser is that your user is using on their website. So for example, I'm designing my website and this looks so nice and perfect and I love it and I'm so happy with it. Until Bob goes on my website, maybe he's on a phone, or maybe he's on a smaller monitor, or maybe he's got my, window half screen. And his screen is only this big. See how it's smushing everything together? These look like perfect squares now. But the way I have them laid out are 300 pixel wide rectangles. So you can imagine, if I have pictures, if I have text, if I have stuff, that is not going to look good all smushed and compressed like that. No good. With one line of code, I can fix that problem. So for this one, we're going to go flex wrap. And the default is no wrap. So I can change it to wrap. And what that's going to do, much like CS Grid, as soon as those things run out of space on the main axis horizontally, they will go down and basically create another row, much like CSS Grid did. So instead of everything smushing together, if the user is on a smaller browser, we don't get that distortion. We get things laid out nicely the way that we design them to be laid out. And maybe I will get rid of the space between property, just to give it a bit more visualization. So as soon as that browser gets too small, we slap it on the next row. Too small, slap it. Too small, slap it. And so those are the two main properties, the two main uses of Flexbox, and two problems that it solves very nicely. A couple other properties you can dance around with are row gaps and column gaps. So we know from CS Grid, columns go vertical. So there's 1 column, 2 column, 3 column, 4 column, or at least it looks like there's 4 columns. There's not really any columns in a Flexbox. But I can hit it with a column gap and maybe give it a 20 pixel column gap. And I can kind of create the space myself instead of using the justify content. I mean, I could still use the justify content property and just give myself a more defined space in between things. And if my website gets smaller, well, it's the illusion that we have different rows here for this Flexbox. So I could actually give them a row gap, even though there's not really any rows in this Flexbox. It clearly visualizes, rows and columns. So you can give things some space, nicely like that. One other thing to show, it looks like a CSS grid right now. However, I could change the width of one of these boxes. Let's make it really big. Let's make it 600 pixels. And you can see that there's really no that kind of, dissipates any illusion of there actually being preset columns. Let's make that yellow one a bit bigger too. Let's make that width, 500 pixels. And we don't have to justify content for this one. Cool. So there's what you can do that really CSS Grid would struggle with. Is Flexbox, you don't need things to be uniform. You don't need things to be the same width or the same height even. The Flexbox is going to adjust itself to accommodate the things that you put inside of it, which is pretty cool. And it tackles an issue that we haven't really looked at and we've kind of taken for granted. So there you go. There's Flexbox. It's got a lot of uses and a lot of applications, but I think that's good enough just as an introduction.